Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. My name is Nassim Ahmed, and I will be your host today. I'm delighted to be joined for today's conversation, Professor Haim Bresheeth. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Professor Haim.
Bresheeth.
Haim Bresheeth. Haim is a filmmaker, photographer, and a film studies scholar. He retired from the University of East London, where he worked since early 2002, and he now teaches at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies. He's got a number of books, including a best-selling introduction to the Holocaust. It's had 2 reprints since 1997. And a more recent book, which will be the basis of our conversation today, An Army Like No Other, How the IDF Made a Nation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on not just your book and also the current war in Gaza, Professor Haim. So let's begin with your book, An Army Like No Other. We know modern nationalism, nations, every state has a central institution that is highly revered and can reach, in some cases, it reaches the level of deity. It replaces God with the institution. In some cases, it may be the army. In some other states, it could be something else, a religious institution. In Israel's case, it's the army, which is the central institution of the state. What is the origin of that, and how did that come about?
Thanks. I think that's a very important question to answer before understanding anything about Israel. The army came about quite naturally for settler colonial state. Before there was a state, there was the army. The army was, in a sense, set up in 1920 when the major part of that future army, the Haganah, was set up by the Zionist Federation. Of course, this was illegal according to the British mandate regulations. You couldn't set up a private army. The British army was in control. But the British did not actually invoke that legislation against the Haganah. It was a quiet understanding between Zionism and the British mandate authorities and, of course, the London authorities that at some point in time, an army will be highly necessary to take over the country. And therefore, because this was agreed between the two sides, Britain and the Zionist Federation, Britain came in there partly according to the Balfour Declaration, of course, but also according to the mandate by the League of Nations to enable a Jewish national home in Palestine. And that was not possible, and it isn't possible ever, without a military force that can subjugate and break the resistance of the indigenous population. So, of course, the British closed their eyes to the existence of Haganah and later on the other organizations that will, in 1948, make up the Israeli army. But even before that time, in the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine, where the Palestinians revolted against the mandate because of what it has done to them, together with Zionism, it was quite clear that the British themselves could not defeat the Palestinians without the the Zionist militias. Israel was only to exist 10 years later. So they actually used the Zionist militias against the Palestinians. So in a sense, the army is not only the most important institution of the future Israel in the 30s, but it's the one that guarantees its existence and underwrites its control of most of Palestine. So that's the first thing to understand, that when you compare Israel to Egypt or to North Korea or to many other countries where the army is very important, Syria, etc., you mentioned some, these countries are not settler colonial states. They are more normative states of the ethnicities that are actually making up the state, while Israel was if you look at the beginning of Zionism, they control between 8 and 10%. The population of Jews in Palestine are about between 8 and 10% in 1916 to 1920. These were the percentages. So, of course, with 8 or 10% of a country, you cannot take over the country. So the first task of Zionism after setting up the army is actually bringing people in. And for a long time, this was not very successful. What made it successful, what made it happen, is Hitlerism and Nazism in Germany. Of course, the agreement signed between the Nazi Party and Zionism to make it rather impossible for Jews to leave Germany, Nazi Germany, after 1933 with a penny of their wealth. So anyone who wanted to take a part of their capital and outside of Germany, not just Jews, but of course Germans didn't leave. Jews were allowed to leave only to Palestine with part of their, whatever they had in the bank. And basically, the Nazi Party and the Zionist Federation divided the remnant, the loot, between them. So this was a way of actually financing the Zionist project by looting. The German refugees that came into Palestine. It's also true that they didn't get their money in Palestine. They only got German goods worth that money in Palestine. So that was a way of also helping Germany to defeat the boycott against it. There was a Jewish boycott against it. Now, that means that the army was very important because it needed people. It needed people to fight in it. And at the minute that German Jews started coming in, and later on Jews from Eastern Europe as well, the army was a going concern because it had enough people. When in 1947 the war starts, and people think it started in 1948, but it didn't. It started the day after the UN divided the country. They passed a resolution in November 1947, and the minute that has happened, the army attacked. It wasn't yet called IDF, but the Haganah and the other two organizations, the Stern Gang and the Irgun, attacked for example, cleared the road to Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and took a lot of the villages on the route. And so they did in other places, in Haifa, in Tiberias, later in Jaffa, in Lydda. So basically, the army was the condition of the existence of Israel. The other thing, of course, is that it was the biggest club, if you want, in the country. It was the biggest institution. All men and most women of the Zionist Yishuv, the people living there in Palestine as Zionists, were members of it, were drafted by force or willingly, but they were drafted. And they had no choice about that, a bit like in Ukraine now. So basically, the army was more than 120,000 people in 1948. That was more than all the Arab armies that went into Palestine in May 1948. It was better trained. It was better equipped. It was strongly motivated like any other colonial takeover. And therefore, there was no Palestinian army, of course. There were...
Of course, that would be the case because Zionists came with a project in mind. Palestinians, being indigenous to the land at the time, they did not have a political project as such. Therefore, they did not train their population to take up arms in the way the Zionists did, because they came in with the view of taking over the land. So that's one reason why the early Zionists were as organized as they were. And in one of your writings, you make really good well, you provide really good description of the centrality of the army within Israel. You describe Israel as being an army in search of a nation or in search of a state. So in the chronology of, if you compare Israel to the other countries, the chronology here is that the army comes first, as you say, and then the nation and the state follows after. But the normal trajectory of the chronology is that there are nations, there are people, and the people establish a state, and then the state has an army which is subservient to the nation. And that chronology is somehow different within Israel, where because the army is the nucleus, is the central institution of the country. And that, I presume, has huge ramifications for the choices a state will make. A state where, say, for example, religion is the central institution, or a democratic institution is the central nucleus of a state, they will make choices different to a country where the army is the nucleus and the central institution of the state. So how has that shaped Israel as after it became a state, and its approach to problems, in particular with its neighbors? Or put it another way, what are the limits and the constraints of having the army as the central institution of the nation?
Well, one of the things you already referred to, and that is that there was no nation. There was no Israeli nation, of course. Jews are not a nation. Jews are a religious group with more than one culture, more than one language. Of course. So there were the Jews of Eastern Europe, there were the Jews of Western Europe, the Jews in America, and of course the Jews in the Arab world, Arab and the Muslim world. All these communities were very different, and just bringing them to Palestine, some of them with very forced expulsions by agreement, for example, between Iraq and Zionism. What happened is that you had an army. That army created a state in 1948. But there was no nation. And Ben-Gurion keeps talking about it and writing about it. He said, I can see that we've got an army. We all are that army. It's an army of us all. We have a country to take over, but we have no people. There is no nation. And the nation has to be created. And the only thing that can create it is the army. So a nation created by the army, first of all, the army stays the most important institution after the state is created. Secondly, what happens is that that army is becoming, in the case of Zionism, also the deity. Now, Jews had a very distinct religion for 3,000 years, or at least 2,500 years. That religion, in the 2,000 years of diasporic existence, was a Pacific religion. It wasn't militarized. It wasn't about conflict. It was about avoiding conflict. And therefore, the people coming from either Eastern Europe or the Arab world were not good material because they were Jews. And Jews were not good soldiers. The Jews were intellectuals, they were traders, they were a lot of things, but not soldiers in thousands of years. So it was necessary to make a nation which actually has the army at its center. And of course, the war has helped here. But as late as 1954, Ben-Gurion is actually writing that even then, he doesn't see the nation yet, and it's not united because Mizrahis and Ashkenazis are not thinking in similar ways. And he wanted a nation like Prussia. Prussia was his model. And it is Prussia that was actually identified as a nation, as an army that has a nation. And this was the model that Ben-Gurion used, the Prussian army that has a nation. And therefore, a Prussian, or if you want, a modern Spartan nation was created in the image of that army. And that army was an aggressive army. It wasn't like it's called the defense force, but it was never a defense force. It was an aggressive attack force from the beginning. And for example, Moshe Dayan keeps saying this. Let's not get confused by the name of our army. We are a dynamic, fast, aggressive army, and that's what we have to stay. So you can say that if a nation is built around an aggressive army, it also itself becomes more and more aggressive as that army fights all around, and it did. For example, even before Israel was 10 years old, when it was only 8 in 1956, the Israelis persuade the French and then the British that they should be part of the attack on Nasser. Now, Nasser was the most popular leader of the Arab world ever. It's even now, after so many decades of his death, he is a very popular name in of course, in Palestine, but everywhere else, people are saying, I'm a Nasserist, even today. So Nasser was popular because he actually democratized a third world economy and modernized it. And, for example, gave rights to women that they didn't have before, and actually gave land to the peasants in Egypt. Most of Egypt was the peasantry, you know. He developed the economy, he developed the industry, he developed the media. So Nasser was a danger to the West. That's how he was seen. He was a danger because he was popular. And not only was he popular, but his idea of you know, an Arab nation, pan-Arabism, an Arab nation of all the groups in the Arab East and the West, of course, the Mashriq and the Maghrib, both, was very dangerous for British, American, French imperialism. They had colonies in North Africa, etc. And the British controlled Jordan, Iraq, the French controlled Syria and Lebanon to a degree. So all this was very dangerous. And Israel joined the colonials and excelled, so that they actually continued financing and supporting it. So the nature of a nation that is based on an army, and if this nation is also a settler colonial state, it always needs the army. It can't rest, you know. Britain is involved in a lot of wars, as we know,
So
but it could
just focusing on that, going back to the issue of Nasser and how central he was to Egypt and pan-Arabism. Nasser, of course, was a soldier. He is part of an institution in Egypt, which is also central to the Egyptian state. So there are many states in the world where the army is the central state. You have, as I mentioned, Egypt, and Nasser comes out of that. Many of the Egyptian leaders are from the army. You have Sisi, the more, the current president. Pakistan is another example. Myanmar, Syria. And because the army is so central in countries like Syria, where the nation state and the army is all in the same thing, you have situations like the Syrian civil war, which becomes extremely brutal, extremely bloody, because the three are all one and the same thing. So if I was to play devil's advocate here and say, look, what's the difference between Syria, Egypt, Pakistan, Myanmar, and so many other countries with Israel? Israel is just like those countries where the army plays a central role. Or are there important differences in the centrality of the Israeli army to the state compared to, say, Syria, Egypt, and Pakistan?
Yeah, there are very important. I mean, basically, the army has to go on controlling Israel because it's actually the only way Zionism can actually continue to control more and more of Palestine. Israel depends on attacking not just Palestinians, but also other nations around it. The history is clear about this. Israel has started many wars in the Middle East, especially when we think about Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. They have been attacked many times, and this is still going on. There are attacks against Syria and Lebanon as we speak. Many other attacks against other countries in the Middle East, like Iraq and Iran, are also there. So the army for a settler colonial state is the most important machinery. This is not the case, of course. Egypt is not occupying parts of Lebanon, and Lebanon is not attacking Yemen and the rest of it. So for a settler colonial state, the army is crucial. Now, since 1967, Israel has a mini empire to control. To begin with, it was a much bigger empire, as you know. And the army then also becomes a dual device. It's an army and also a colonial police. So this is something you can't say about all the other countries you mentioned. The other thing is that the army controls the Israeli economy. The Israeli economy is to a large degree dependent on selling arms, selling the know-how of controlling populations. Israel is leading the world in controlling cities, for example. Machinery for controlling cities, hardware, software, procedures, training of personnel to control cities. The army in Israel is controlling many other things apart from fighting and even apart from policing. I'll give you another example. The army has been the main machinery that trained actors, actresses, directors, cameramen for film and television because it controlled the media for many years. Now, I don't think this is true about all those other countries. The television and radio services were controlled directly from the prime minister's office. Now, which other country can you point out? Maybe North Korea, I'm not sure. That this is the case. So if you wanted, and I remember that as a young boy, people were told if you want to go into the media, you have to be in the army service broadcasting. Yeah. So the army is a publisher of books. The army is a publisher of music. The army is has two radio stations. and some television involvement. I don't remember how many theatrical troupes that were created for singing and dancing and entertaining the troops. But then they became just normal. I can't think of many actors and actresses in Israel's history that didn't go through this training. And of course, all the media personnel. Now, if you are training as, say, a television reporter in the army, now, what kind of view would you have of reality? So this is very different from the countries that you have mentioned, I think. Now, the main thing is the arms industry that controls this year alone, and this year, of course, is selling much more than the year before and the year before that, because of Ukraine and because of what is happening now. The army is controlling tens of billions of dollars in production. It owns some of the production, or it seeded some of the productions through startups. It's the most important financial and industrial institution in Israel and in the Middle East.
Yeah, and it almost begs the question: if you have a central institution like the army in a state or in a nation, does it require endless cycles of war for it to survive? Can it survive without war? Can it survive without threat and fear on its borders, or exaggerating threat? So it begs that question. And another thing that reinforces the point you're making is the kind of myths that are spread about Israel, or the kind of myths Israel has erected in defense of its army. Every nation produces myths in support of its existence. And there's more myths about Israeli army than anything else. The idea of it being a moral army, the idea of it being invincible. Again, that was founded on the idea of conquest, defeating Arab armies in 1948, 1967, 73. So you've got this image of a plucky Israel, small Israel, taking on the might of the Arab nations. And that's something within the psyche of the Israelis. Has that now been destroyed, though, this image of the Israeli army? It lost, you can say, in 2006 to Hezbollah, and now it's not able to defeat Hamas. So are we seeing, can that detrimentally impact the image Israelis have of the central institution governing their society, governing their country?
Yes and no. In a sense, the Israeli army has not won anything in any battle for many decades. Since 1973, it's clear that the Israelis are not practical when it comes to their army. They are not really thinking through the military conflicts that they're facing, but they're thinking about them as racists do in a settler colonial state. And racists everywhere, white racists especially, of course, think about the forces against them as distinctly inferior. And Israel is a great example of that. They knew that there is a plan by the Egyptians and Syrians to attack both in the Canal Zone and in the Golan Heights, and they decided that this is not going to happen because obviously those armies are incapable of doing that. And look at what happened in 1973. They thought that Hamas, they knew that Hamas has a plan. It was even on Hamas television, it was not a secret. And they actually had the plan, like they did have the plan of the Egyptians in 1973. But having those plans and knowing that this is being planned for years, actually, in both cases, did not stop them from disregarding the possibility that it might happen. In the case of 2006 and also in 1982, those two wars in Lebanon were anything but a victory for Israel. Why? Because a very large modern army cannot fight resistance fighters that have RPGs and light guns. This has been proven in many places, most famously in Vietnam. The strongest army in the world could not defeat Vietnam. Why could Israel think that it would defeat Hamas? I don't know, but they obviously can't. They also proven that they can't defend the Israeli citizens on the 7th of October. Look what happened. They couldn't even defend themselves when they were attacked by Hamas. So this army is not really an army anymore. It is a startup for arms industry, that's for sure. It's an intelligence system that the politicians in the end don't take seriously when they get the intelligence, and it's a police force that actually can't, of course, police, because you cannot police an occupation successfully. All occupations in the end are doomed to fail. And this is just another one that is doomed to fail, and it's already failing very badly. So the myth are one thing, the reality is another. Hezbollah, which is such a small organization, it was fought by 120 to 130,000 modern, well-trained, well-equipped, the best army in the Middle East attacked Hezbollah in 2006. It couldn't possibly defeat it. And not only that, it had to ask the Americans to extricate them diplomatically because they wanted to get out. After 30 days of war, they started losing so many soldiers and so many tanks. They had to have assistance extricating themselves. So Israel is, more than once, many times, need to be extricated by its bigger partners because it doesn't have a plan. The only plan, and I think that's something to think about, the only plan that they had in Gaza is actually not to destroy Hamas, as they say, but to hit as many Gazans as possible, destroy their houses, destroy the infrastructure, destroy the mosques, destroy the water, electricity. Everything had to be destroyed. So Gaza will become totally inhabitable. And this is what they're doing. So this is not exactly a job for an army, but they're doing it. And this is done by armies elsewhere, of course. But we haven't seen, for example, the Russian army destroying everything that is standing in Ukraine. But this is what the Israelis did in Gaza.
Yeah. So on that, I was going to ask you, you mentioned Russia, Ukraine, and Israel in Gaza, and just the sheer contrast in the manner of the contrast in the destruction, the level of destruction is so obvious for everyone to see. By every metric, there's a genocide taking place in Gaza. We spoke about the centrality of the army. The army being the nucleus of the Israeli state, the army being installed by the Zionist project as defenders of Jews. So given that's the psyche, given that's the background, so October 7 happens, the Israeli army fails completely. What does that do to the nation's psyche when the very institution, the core of your the core of your country, the institution that's been set up to defend the country fails so miserably? Does that explain the response? The response seems, as you mentioned, it seems more about vengeance, more about annihilating the Palestinians, making Gaza uninhabitable, as is the case. So is that the reason? Because the army was humiliated and it has to find a way to regain its reputation and deterrence capacity, and replant itself as the core central institution, having failed so miserably?
I think basically Israel has no deterrence capacity. And this is a terrible shock for Israelis. It doesn't matter how many times this has happened, it's always a surprise for them that their army can and does fail constantly. So it was a total shock in 1982, where the army was very good at killing or making possible the killing of people and Sabra and Shatila, but it wasn't actually able to defeat the PLO. And the PLO was really miserably small and badly equipped and even badly trained. And yet, fighting in the different camps around Beirut and Tyre and Sidon, they gave an amazing fight back to the Israelis in 1982. I'm not even talking about 2006, where the Israeli army walked into a trap and couldn't actually survive. So every time that happens, the Israelis are surprised. But it's not surprising, you just need to look at the history. And on the 7th of October, the surprise was, for the first time, double, because not only did they kill about 350 soldiers that couldn't defend themselves, some of them didn't even have rifles. Now, you might ask yourself what kind of an army that is. But of course, more people died in the kibbutzim and Sderot and the 11 settlements around Gaza had about 650, 700 people who were not soldiers who died, including the concert goers. So basically, this was the worst shock in the history of Israel, not to the army only, but actually to the whole population. And in some senses, you can't say what the difference is, because the army that was amassed to destroy Gaza was 500,000 people big. Now, where is there 500,000 people? And Israel is a very small nation. The British army is less than 100,000 people. Just think about it. Britain is 9 times the size of Israel, and its army is not even 90,000 people. So when they amassed 500,000 people against few thousand of the Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters, you knew that they are not there to defeat Hamas, and they can't defeat Hamas because Hamas is not an army. Hamas is a political movement. It's a government of Gaza. It is a party that won the election in Palestine, and it also has an armed wing, like the Republicans had in Northern Ireland, like the ANC had in South Africa, like the Algerians had during the war against the French. The FLN, the ANC, and the IRA were not the whole movement. They were just part of the movement. So Hamas is a political organization. It's a social organization. It is an administration, and you can't defeat it. You can kill people. You can kill people. That's what the Israelis very good at, killing unarmed civilians. That's what they do in the West Bank every day. So that's their speciality, killing women and children. They're good at that.
And the quote that comes to and the quote that comes to mind is if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Exactly.
I think from its very founding, the military solution has always been the #1 solution Israel has opted for.
And most of the time, it was also the first and the last solution.
Yeah.
There was never another solution. But
which begs the question. Sorry, I just want to focus on this specific area, which begs the question. I mean, Israel, as you mentioned, it's like a Spartan-like society. So in the modern day and age, is that type of society even capable of peace? I don't mean peace the way we've seen, where it's enforced, where you through military power and strength, but one that's based on justice and equality, which would require a non-military solution, a civic solution. It would require an enforcement of international law. And recognition of the humanity of the Palestinians. There's all these other considerations that needs to happen for a solution that's based on justice. But when you have a country and a state and a nation where the army is central, where every problem looks like a nail, with which, is it capable of peace? Yeah, that's the question. I think
I don't think it's neither capable of peace nor willing or wishing for peace, and never did. Partly because they believe, this is a paradox, they believe that the army is totally indefatigable, that it cannot be defeated. And yet any defeat of it is harming them deeply, because when you are mainly a soldier on leave, which most of the male population is in Israel, and now even a very large part of the female population of adults. When you are a soldier on leave, then a defeat like that of the army is hitting you personally. It's not something like, if in Britain the British army is defeated somewhere, it would be a bad news story, but it wouldn't hurt 70 million people in Britain, like the 7 million Israeli Jews have been hit. So this is a very different situation. The other thing is this: if you are an aggressive, militarized, Spartan nation, then the last thing you want is negotiations, because negotiations seem to suggest some equality between the sides. Now, of course, that equality is not there, mainly because of the Israeli army. But in negotiations, you can't really get all you want. They believe that the only way to get all you want, which is all of Palestine, is through fighting and through the army. And any number of defeats will not work, because then they say and think and believe that they didn't actually use enough force. So the solution when a militarized nation is thinking about politics is to offer more force than before, and therefore defeat the enemy. So Israel has ratcheted up every single time that there was an attack on Gaza. There was more violence, more bombing. Israel is already threw more bombs on little Gaza than the Nazis did in the year of the Blitz. 3 times more, and 3 times more than the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, think about that. In Britain, 200 people died on average every night in Nazi attacks during a year. Now, Israel's already done more than that. In 4 months, it did 3 times the damage that has been caused in Britain. So this is an unprecedented attack on a population without defense. The other thing that is unprecedented, and I always want to make sure that people know and appreciate that difference, is nobody actually came in to join Russia in the attack on Ukraine. Yeah, people were not queuing up, like the United States didn't queue up to join the Russians. No, they joined Ukraine. And so did the rest of the world, the West, that is. The West actually queued up to join Israel in destroying Gaza. They have put a huge navy of they continue to fight Yemen, they continue to fight Iran, attacks in Iraq. this is incredible. The genocide in Gaza could not happen ever, and could not continue, and could not cause the damage that it did without the whole West attacking Palestine. Attacking Palestine financially, politically. For example, the attack on UNRWA, the removal of the support of UNRWA, which is a civil organization that the Israelis have accused without providing any evidence to this very day. By removing the money from UNRWA, you're removing the little food that Palestinians can get, and you're removing the only distribution machinery that exists. This is a genocidal attack by the West on a third world country, on a third world population, on a population which is basically subjugated by colonialists. And I don't think that has ever happened before, and I hope it never happens again.
Yeah, everything you're describing, Haim, it speaks to what many feel is that we've reached peak Israel impunity. Israel is almost getting away with genocide, and the Americans and its Western allies are supporting that. But at the same time, we can see the backlash. We see the international community, when I say international, I mean non-Western, non-US, condemning Israel. There are two cases in the ICJ, International Court of Justice, the highest judicial body of the United Nations, one for genocide and one about the illegality of Israel's occupation in the West Bank. And yesterday we saw the horrific scene, horrific image of Aaron Bushnell burning himself, setting himself alight, saying he will not be complicit in genocide. It shows that there seems to be global outrage. But of course, the genocide in Gaza has to come to an end. So looking forward, final question, do you think Israel and the US are in a position to be able to install another colonial arrangement, or has the global community, has the region just had enough and have had enough of Israeli militarism, and they will insist on a settlement based on justice, which is the only way towards sustainable peace, proper peace, settlement based on justice, which means recognizing Palestinians as your equal, Palestinians as human beings. Is that how you see the coming years, or are we going to see another colonial arrangement based on on serving Israel's colonial needs and interests?
I think you're right when you speak about it in terms of peak apartheid and peak colonialism in Palestine. Israel has reached that peak exactly because it ratcheted the violence year on year, and now they've done that which shouldn't be done ever, and that is they started the genocide against helpless people and hopeless community. Now, the world can take so much and no more. So the paradox is Israel has never been stronger. It's never been more supported financially, militarily, politically, diplomatically, any way you want. The West is now putting all its coupons on that Israeli spot. However, at the same time, you describe accurately the worldwide reaction and revulsion of the crimes of Israel and the West. I'm saying Israel and the West because now people see that very clearly that the United States, that our own country, the UK, that the EU, Canada, Australia are actually, the whole West is supporting genocide in every possible way it can. This has never happened before. Imagine that the whole world was supporting Hitler in killing people in the Holocaust. This has never happened before. So yeah, Israel is very strong. The West is very strong. Both the West and Israel are declining. This is the story behind that. And the period, the most dangerous period to be around an empire is when it is declining fast. And, those empires are declining fast. And therefore, they're acting irresponsibly, exactly like Israel. They're a copy of the Israeli behavior. Uh, in Israel, since the January 23, for a year almost, until the 7th of October, you had a society that was never as divided, and it's still divided. The only thing that brings it together is hatred and venom against the Palestinians and the genocide that they're all around, they're all in agreement with that. But everything else is dividing Israelis completely. Israel is basically hollowed out now. It is still capable of killing a lot of children, a lot of babies, a lot of women who don't have anywhere to give birth but in the street. They are capable of destroying schools, of destroying mosques. They are capable of a lot of war crimes. They're not capable of holding the society together. And this is also true about Britain and about the United States. Look at those societies, how divided they are, how divisive they are, how aggressive and destructive they have become. So I'm saying, like you hinted at, that the peak point of apartheid is also the point of non-viability of the Zionist regime. Israel has made itself non-viable very, very fast. And now a society like Israel that commits genocide like that in Gaza is no longer viable. Zionism and Israel are no longer viable. They are on the way out. Now, I'm not the only one who says this. Many historians have made that point, that they cannot actually run that society anymore because it has now become just an army. This is what we're seeing. Israel is just an army, just venomous and vengeance. The whole population is denying reality. A society like this cannot exist. Now, that is not to say that they cannot cause even greater harm and greater damage before they bow out as a society. And that is a dangerous time for empires, even mini empires like Israel. And it's a very dangerous time for the West that supports it. And I hope that the international community, that part of it, which is understanding and reacting in the ICJ and in the other institutions that look after international order, is strong enough to, in a sense, subsume and control the destructive urges of the Western Israel. I'm not 100% sure that this is the case, that there is enough. I wish there wasn't now a war between Ukraine and Russia, because then Russia could act much more positively than it can at the moment. But now that China is involved centrally, and other countries, of course, are joining South Africa in the ICJ and everywhere else, now that even countries in Europe, like Holland, are facing their own courts that say you can't provide arms to Israel. We see what happened in the UK. I mean, the UK is indeed in dire trouble because the elite is supporting Israel even against the parliament and the elected representatives in parliament. So I think that there is now a very fragile situation internationally, not just in Gaza and in the Middle East, but in the Middle East, Israel has been a destructive force even before it was created in 1948. It was a destructive force in the Middle East. It helped to stop development in the Middle East. it helped to delay things. We talked about pan-Arabism, etc. I think that what a number of us have believed in for many years, a single democratic state in Palestine for all Palestinians, including the refugees, and for those Israeli Jews who are not racist and who accept equality and justice and peace, would be an amazing political force in the Middle East itself. It would be a beacon for democracy. We have seen how eager and keen the Arab populations are for democracy in the Arab Spring. They were defeated, but only a temporary defeat, I believe. So that wish for democracy is going to win in the end, I believe. And a free Palestine and a peaceful Palestine could be the centerpiece of it because of its importance to the three religions, to history, to culture, but also because it is the heart of so much destruction. And if we could remove that destructive force, if we could decolonize Palestine, we could achieve, such feats of democratic change in the Middle East that are unimaginable now. But, some of us have talked about rebuilding Gaza as the center project of that, plan. However, I want to put a note of care. We have got to be careful about projecting these without qualifying them. If I am not able to speak to anyone in Israel, I am not able to speak to my family, I'm not able to face any Israeli that does not support Palestine 200%, because that is justice in the end. So how will the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine react if we said to them, let us have, a state for all with those people who killed you, with those people who committed genocide against you? So this is a long-term plan, and the short-term plan should not be a two-state solution, leaving Zionism intact, because that's the toxic element in the Middle East. That the solution should be a federation with a decolonized Palestine, a binational federation that would lead to one democratic state. That's what I think should happen, because Palestinians and Israelis are not ready at the moment for the kind of peace that exists in Europe now that was unthinkable in 1945. So we need to think historically, we need to think gradually, we need to prepare the possibility of just peace in stages. But this is not possible with countries like US, UK, and the EU supporting Zionism in an unqualified manner. It's just not going to happen as long as they control the agenda.
Yeah, I think we need to get you back on and speak about solutions later in another program. But I think it's been fascinating having you. I think going forward, the point you mentioned about decolonizing Palestine, that can only happen, of course, if you have a state where the military is not the central institution, where Israel becomes a state like every other state, a country which serves its population, where the people are at the center, where the people living in all of historic Palestine have equal rights and live, Jews, Muslims, and Christians live as one. Until you have an institution where everyone is viewed in that light, then it seems we're very far from the kind of solution you're advocating, as are so many others. But I think we can have that conversation in another program. Haim, it's been fascinating listening to you, and I hope we can have you on soon. And for those who've tuned in, thank you for joining us, and I'll see you in another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for inviting me.